We're about to watch something different than what we normally do, and that is the commutation of death row inmates. There are 56 death row inmates in Louisiana that qualified for this process by Governor Edwards. And basically, it's a hearing that we're about to see that will either deny or approve the right for the inmate to then have a hearing. So in this case, the inmate will not be present. You'll only have the advocates for and against. With that, let's jump in. I'll do an unpacking at the end of the next three hearings that we're about to see.
Good morning, members. Good morning to all of you in the room and those behind me. I don't know if they can see me. Good morning to those who are joining us virtually as well. Thank you for the opportunity to be here. Just 2 minutes, as I've said before, is as important as any 2 minutes I've ever taken in front of any panel in my 30-plus year career. I'm here as the Executive Director of the Louisiana District Attorney Association, as a career prosecutor and a former Chief of Police, with monolithic opposition to this application, as we have all the others. We're here today, candidly, because folks who had decades, but surely at least 8 years, to file these applications, have dumped this stump in your room and said, deal with it. And when they did that, all of these people were forced to deal with it. The people behind me were forced to deal with it, our offices, your staff. And candidly, you've done as good a job as I think could possibly be done. And I thank you for that. I know that you're here in great sacrifice, out of turn. These victims have been thrust into the spin cycle of this washing machine. But we ask you to bring, once again, sanity to this process. Thank you for allowing the victims to speak to you, to hear their word. I know it's tough. That's what we hear every day when we do our jobs. Thank you for listening to what they have to say. And at the end of the day, we pray that you will not force this victim to go through a full clemency hearing, and you will deny the request for such a hearing. Thank you very much for your time.
We have public comment in favor of G. Park with the Innocence Project.
Good morning. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, I can.
Perfect. Good morning. My name is G. Park. I'm the Executive Director of Innocence Project New Orleans. For the last 22 years, ITNO has been freeing innocent people from Louisiana prisons. ITNO has freed 46 individuals who are factually innocent of crimes they were not convicted of. They were not guilty of. They did nothing wrong, and yet they were tried and convicted and collectively spent more than 1,132 years in prison for crimes they did not commit. According to the National Registry of Exonerations, since 1989, 85 innocent people have been freed from Louisiana prisons to date. Louisiana has one of the highest rates of exoneration of the innocent per capita. This is not something we should be proud of. It is a stain on our criminal justice system. This means that our criminal justice system is far from just and is fraught with errors. Louisiana's death penalty cases are not any different. 12 innocent people have been exonerated from Louisiana's death row. When these 12 innocent individuals were convicted, the prosecution and the victims believed they were guilty, and yet we now know that they were not. The state got it wrong and executed 12 innocent people, nearly executed 12 innocent people. For every 7 people executed in Louisiana, 3 people have been freed because they were innocent. I ask you, if you knew that for every 7 planes that took off from an airport, 3 would crash, would you trust that system? Would you fly again? Since 1999, 95% of Louisiana death sentences have been reversed. The risk of executing an innocent person in Louisiana is simply too high. From Baton Rouge Parish, 3 innocent men have been exonerated. No jurisdiction, no parish is immune from wrongful convictions. For 46 years, ITNO's client Wilbur Jones from Baton Rouge proclaimed his innocence, and he was ignored. until IPNO exonerated him. A conviction by a jury in no way guarantees guilt. In Louisiana, the high risk of executing innocent on death row is intolerable. Please, I ask this pardon board to hear and carefully consider the cases of men on death row who say they are innocent. I thank you very much for this time to speak.
Thank you. We appreciate your comments. All right, we'll move on into our regular business now. The first item is housekeeping, review and approval of the minutes from Wednesday, November 8th, which were included in your packets. Are there any corrections?
Madam Chairman, I have reviewed the minutes of November 8th, and all information is correct. I'd like to make a motion that we accept the minutes as printed.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Roche, a second by Mr. Freeman to approve the minutes from Wednesday, November 8th, 2023. Is there any objection? Hearing none, the minutes are approved. Thank you. All right, the matter at hand today is administrative review of one clemency application, and that is in the matter of Henry Broadway, his DOC number 223540. Mr. Broadway was sentenced February 2nd, 1996 in East Baton Rouge Parish for a first-degree murder conviction. Baton Rouge Police Department Corporal Betty Smothers was the victim of that matter. First, we'll hear from the folks who are here in support, and I'll allow Ms. Ottinger. I don't know if you want Mr. Scheck to speak first or you, so I'll let you proceed.
Thank you very much. I wanted to just cover an administrative matter before I begin, and that is whether I could, we won't be taking more time, but whether I could cede 3 of my minutes to Mr. Scheck. And
Sure.
Yes. Yes. Thank you so much. I'm so sorry for the pain that this administrative review process. I can't imagine. But I'm here today to say that Mr. Broadway is innocent. No one wants to hear that after 30 years. No one. But imagine asserting it for 30 years to death years. When the courts fail to recognize the need for at least a new trial, clemency is the only way to prevent the execution of an innocent man. The Supreme Court has called it the fail-safe in a flawed system, the clemency system. And Louisiana's Pardon Board in 1989 did recommend clemency in the case of Ronald Monroe, who put on a case of innocence. It recommended that he be given a life sentence because there was still doubt as to his guilt. And Governor Romer granted the life sentence. That was in 1989. And Mr. Monroe is still serving a life sentence. That's all we're asking for here. A hearing at which you determine whether Mr. Broadway should be granted a life sentence. It is impossible to present full arguments for clemency in a capital case in this format. There's just too little time. Mr. Broadway does, however, meet the criteria this board generally applies for a full hearing, and he should be granted one. He has not had a write-up for 24 months. Indeed, he has not had one since 2018. He's been incarcerated for 30 years. Most of his prior arrests were at a juvenile, many were dropped, and he has no convictions of violent crimes. He should be granted a full. Thank you.
Mr. Scheck? You're muted, sir.
Thank you very much. I join in the remarks of my colleague G. Park from the New Orleans Innocence Project. I am the co-founder and special counsel to the Innocence Project, which started 31 years ago. So I have been involved in over 245 cases personally of people been exonerated across the country. But 17 of these I have personally litigated in Louisiana with many of the people that were involved in this prosecution. So I just want to tell Hiller Moore, the district attorney, that we sat together at the exoneration of Archie Williams. And Archie Williams was convicted of rape, a very serious rape in Baton Rouge. And for years, we had tried to get DNA testing. And finally, we were able to get a search of a fingerprint at the crime scene that led not only to Mr. Williams' exoneration, but we identified the person who had committed not just that crime, but other crimes in the area of Baton Rouge. And I sat with District Attorney Moore and reviewed that. And I'm sure neither of us will ever forget that. The truth of the matter is the eyewitness identification procedures that occurred in the Archie Williams case were not nearly as bad as this one. The eyewitness in this case initially said she could not make an identification. She was subject to hypnosis. The Louisiana courts frown on the use of hypnotically enhanced recollection to start with, but in many states in this country it is appropriately condemned and not allowed at all. That, in addition to exposure to pictures on the television of Mr. Broadway, was egregious in terms of eyewitness identification practices. For that alone, Mr. Broadway had a very solid alibi defense. This is plainly a case of eyewitness mistaken identification. There's an extremely high risk that he was wrongly identified, but that's not it completely at all. There is terrible evidence in this case of a false confession. He was coerced. A plastic bag, there is solid evidence to indicate was it during the interrogation placed over his head. Even worse than that, I must say, and I have not seen this in many cases at all around the country, is the co-defendant was, as a surprise witness, suddenly called at the trial, this West Paul. I haven't seen a record like this in years, that the attorney for the co-defendant, right, Joel Porter and Judge Johnson, a judge, came forward and said, we do not believe that he should go forward and testify that Mr. Broadway is guilty of this crime because we think he's committed perjury. And it's my understanding that there is still a document that was put into evidence, what was given to the trial judge that has never been revealed. This is extraordinary evidence of misconduct, prosecutorial misconduct and police misconduct in this case. And we all know about coerced false confessions. I just commend your attention to a case that is just like this, that I spent 10 years litigating with Paul Connick in Jefferson Parish, the case of Damon Thibodeau, who was also on death row. A coerced confession, bad identification.
Thank you, sir. All right, we're going to move into the opposition. First, we'd like to hear from the victim's family. Mr. Dunn, could we hear from you, sir?
Yes, ma'am. This is, it's heartbreaking because, I understand individuals go to prison, wrongly convicted. I do understand that. In this situation, that's not the case. And it's really disrespectful. And I'm over here getting emotional listening to, nonsense, not even understanding that if someone is shot and killed your family members, they come to your front door, you're not going to have that perspective. And then if you think about it, we have police officers that are supposed to be protecting us, serving and protecting. And all of a sudden now we got a guy who's been on death row for 30 years. He's able to get up every day. eat 3 meals, call his family, and what? My kids, my brothers and sisters' kids, grandkids won't be able to meet their grandmother. They don't have that experience of, the value she could have added to their life. And then everyone wants to talk about, because I play professional football and, I help families. Well, I'm not able to do the things that I do for other individuals because my mom is not here. She sacrificed her life to protect people. And to listen to this nonsense, this is nonsense about an individual who has been convicted, not innocent. And also, well, I heard in the past, well, he put a gun to another lady's head and it jammed. No one talks about that. I mean, it's just frustrating because people are sacrificing their lives, and the police officers, we let someone off death row, let some clemency, this or that. Any individual in this country would go around thinking they could just kill and shoot people, and their consequences is that I'm just going to spend the rest of my life in prison, and I can eat 3 meals a day, spending taxpayers' dollars. Please. It's just disrespectful. And I mean, I oppose, these two individuals, everyone who's opposing that, he needs clemency, that he needs to be off death row or out of, I oppose that. And, I know my sister, I don't know if she's able to talk, but she can also express herself in a way that, I mean, my younger sister didn't have her mother, 9 years old. You think she could have been a better woman today than she is now? Yes, my sister could have. So you guys don't understand anything. And go out, defend people. I don't want innocent people to die, lose their life. I'm all about that. But in this case, don't commit me and my family who suffered all these years. Because at 18 years old, I had to become a father. And I took care of my brothers and sisters because that's what my mom trained me to do over the years, because we couldn't afford a house. We couldn't afford this and that. We were surviving.
Thank you, Mr. Dunn. Thank
Yes,
you. Summer Smothers, or would you like to say a few words? There you go. You're still on mute.
I'm sorry, I'm in the car trying to drive. We ride somewhere, so I apologize.
Okay, is there something you'd like us to know?
Yes, just to piggyback off my brother, I did write a speech and just wanted to make you guys aware as we reflect on this 30-year journey without our mother. We are constantly reminded that we have a hole in our hearts that will never be filled. The pain won't stop and some memories fade, but the constant flashback of January 7, 1993 remains. The worst part of it all, I remember it like it was yesterday. Each year getting harder and harder to process. We all have grown up with kids of our own, which makes this part of life most difficult to bear. People often ask, how do you heal from something like this? I reply, you never heal. You always be broken. You always wonder what life could have been if she was still here. But instead, we constantly try to explain to our kids who our mother was. Have you ever imagined trying to explain to a child what a cemetery looks like? Why she's not there, not here with us? Or when they ask to see their grandmother, you have to take them to a burial plot, a tombstone that can't speak words of comfort back or give them reassurance that everything is okay. Have you ever opened a piece of mail and thought you seen a ghost, asking yourself, why does God keep punishing us? We all received a letter from this attorney office back in April, not knowing not one of us told the other one that we had received this letter because it was going to open a door that we all tried to keep closed. Within 30 years, we have never had anyone from the defendant's side check up on us. But what amazed us, as soon as Governor Edwards announced he was against the death penalty, the office engaged a defense victim outreach specialist to inform us of the new development in the case. We started trying to place pieces together. We made phone calls to figure out what was going on, and that's when we was informed of Broadway petition to appeal. Once again, how can you ever hear from something if it's a revolving door? Our family has been through so much, in another, we just devastating to the families. This not only affects us, but our kids, who now try to process what's going on, learning about the unspoken, unfiltered truth of our mother's death that we try to protect them from. They never knew the impact of our mom's death had on us. They just thought, I'm sorry. Somebody called. They just started trying to place pieces together, make a phone call to figure out what's going on. I'm sorry. Our family has been through so much, in another, just devastating to our families. This not only affects us, but we're trying to process what's going on, learning the unspoken truth of our mother's death. They just started trying to notice the trends and behavior when it comes to certain things and milestones. As I close, I want you guys to understand the hurt, the pain, and love that I can't get back. Imagine yourself at 14 being woken up to your news that your mother was shot and killed, not because she was doing anything wrong, but because she was serving and protecting the citizens of Baton Rouge. Now you and your sibling has to figure out life. Who's going to provide for you? Where you going to live? Are we going to be able to stay together? All while prepping to bury your only parent you have. But we accept the fact that Mr. Broadway continues to breathe life, get 3 meals a day, continues to have conversation and see his family, a privilege that we can't experience and haven't experienced for the last 30 years. But we have to talk to the tombstone that don't speak back. When will we be allowed?
Ma'am, I'm sorry to interrupt. Can you wrap it up for us, please?
Yes, ma'am. I'm finishing up. When will we be allowed to feel like the system isn't broken and hears our cries? All we want is justice that's overdue, and I don't have the luxury to know what a true mother loves feel like. I'm opposed to this petition for appeal for clemency. This is something that we deal with all the time, and we just on my behalf and my sister and brothers, we're opposed to this clemency petition.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today. Ms. Lee.
Thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak. I have been silent for far too long, almost 31 years to be exact. And not to take anything away from Betty, God rest her soul, but I lived in the shadows. When this tragedy is talked about, I'm not even spoken of. I have, however, been living this every single day of my life. January 7th will be 31 years ago this happened. This tragic event took everything from me. I lived with survivor's guilt, and at times it's more than I can bear. In the past, I've lived in fear. I would look out my window and feel so hopeless, sad, and depressed. Never saw the glass half full. Not long after everything happened, I found myself locked up in a mental hospital for 3.5 weeks. I tried to heal and move on with my life, but it felt impossible. I saw a therapist for over 3 years. I couldn't understand why this happened to me. How could anyone do this? As time passed, I learned to pick myself up and try to move forward. Every day was a challenge. I lived every day of my life with PTSD. I will for the rest of my days on earth. My coworkers, my friends, my family, my neighbors know never to walk up on me without my full attention, because it sends me into a dark place of fear and anxiousness. Please understand, by you doing this brings pain into all of our lives. We will never get back what was taken from us. I ask and I beg of you, please do not do this. One life was lost and several lives were changed forever. By reducing the sentence from death to life imprisonment, you are diminishing the atrocity of what was done to us. Betty died, her children's lives changed forever. I lived with this my whole life. Our lives mean more than this. And I will say, without any uncertainty, I know who I identify. And I stand tall and 100% certain I know the man that I saw that night, on that rainy night, was Andre Broadway, without any doubt in my mind. And I beg of you, please don't do this. We've lived in pain for so long. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Daniels?
And I stand before you in opposition. My name is Myron Daniels, and I represent the Baton Rouge Police Department as the Chief of Staff. I think this is one of those events, if you grew up in Baton Rouge, where you were when you heard that it occurred. I also, not a police officer at that time, but over the last 25 plus years in our agency, I get to watch and see that the time still hadn't healed. This is still one of the most common topics discussed in our police department, and we're still assisting a lot of our officers who were there or who were friends or who actually responded to the scene that night because they're still in the healing process. We're in great opposition of this request. We ask that you please deny it. And again, we pray for the family, law enforcement, as well as personally.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Ferris?
I'm Chair, Judge. I'm Greg Ferris. I was the police chief in 1993 and take just a moment to address Mr. Sheriff's comments. Every confidence this investigation was done correctly. Conviction was correct. He was correctly decided. And that Mr. Broadway is where he is because he did what the state's accused of doing. We just very strongly verify that any killing of a police officer is one of those heinous crimes that can be committed because it is an attack on civilization. It's an attack on the people to keep civilization, that veneer of civilization we have in place. Many killings of police officers are what I would call unpopular. Somebody who's mentally deranged, or maybe a police officer responds to a domestic issue, a violent domestic issue, where emotions are at their peak. He or she gets shot and killed. This was an ambush. This was 3 people trying to set up an ambush behind the bank on Jefferson Highway and try to kill, successfully one, unsuccessfully the second, kill 2 people to commit an armed robbery. It's about as bad as it gets in the way of killing of a police officer. Premeditated, pre-planned, and tragically executed quite skillfully. I cannot speak with the authenticity of work or summer, but let me take you back, as I said in my letter, the day after killing in January 1993. Tom Ed McHugh and I went to that very modest house, Baton Rouge. We walked in the door. There's a young man sitting in a chair on the right, holding a little child in his lap, stroking his head, and comforting the child. Walked in. He said, I kissed him, kissed the child, said, "You go in the back. I've got to talk to this gentleman." That, of course, is important. He has been an incredibly successful human being, incredibly successful man, high school, college, and pro star, running back, 108 pounds. A philanthropist, author. He has accomplished a lot, but what he does not have, never had, is the ability to give his mother house, comfort her in her old age, to be with her. She passes away at the age of 85. Never had it. It's Broadway with two other people. Drive an ambush, steal some money, and kill two people. Continue to kill two people. That fine. January 1990. They succeeded in taking Betty's mother's life. Almost succeeded in taking Keith's. Broadway has been through trial, it's been through appeals, all the way up, I believe, certainly Louisiana, I think the U.S. Supreme Court. And how far that process has been, that conviction has been affirmed. I have no reason to support Mr. Schecht's intention that this was a bad investigation or a bad conviction. I instructed my then chief of detectives, Don Bull, that this had to be done absolutely right, that this was a killing of a police officer. The most sensational crime that happened in Baton Rouge since January 1972. And it had to be done right, and I was holding him responsible as chief of detectives. 3 days later, he was in my office. Run out of time.
Yes, sir.
About check. He had been there the whole time, supervised it 100%. His eyes looked like a road map in Chicago, and I said, "Go home and get some sleep. You got this." For the Baton Rouge Police Department, and more so for Betty's family, I am in strong opposition to this, asking not to commit Mr. Broadway.
Thank you, sir. All right, Mr. Moore, Ms. Barbera, I'll turn it over to y'all.
Good morning. Good morning to all of you, Judge Jackson. I listened to all these statistics from exonerations in the state of Louisiana. I just need to set the record straight right now that when we have an offender who's going through post-conviction relief in federal court, and the judge determines that there is a degree of intellectual disability that would mean that person cannot be executed, and we enter into a contract for life, and that person spends the rest of his life in general population in Angola, that is not an exoneration. And it is extremely offensive that these anti-death penalty zealots, they have the right to their opinion. I disagree with it, they have the right to their opinion, but don't misrepresent the statistics. And I hear no mention of the cases where additional DNA testing is ordered, and it in fact further confirms the victim's eyewitness identification of the rapist, one we had just a few years ago in East Baton Rouge Parish. So yes, it's real easy to focus on the cases where DNA may have exonerated people, and we can throw out names, but let's not talk anymore about those cases. Let's talk about the fact that Kim and Lee, by the grace of God, was here to speak to you this morning. Let's talk about the fact that, as retired Chief Barry said, civilization is completely disrupted when someone decides to kill a law enforcement officer, someone who takes their life into their hands every day. This was not a domestic violence situation. We have unfortunately lost law enforcement in our community to that. This is a man who plotted with his co-defendant to commit this armed robbery. This is a man who, during his time at Angola, he filed complaints because his sex novel wasn't delivered timely, or he didn't know the method of execution. He waited to start taking classes. I think Living in Balance just started in 2023. This is a man who testified in his defense at trial and didn't just say, "I am innocent." He alleged that Kim and Lee was in on this, that this was an inside job. It doesn't get much more offensive than that. As Mr. Lambert said, we sincerely appreciate having the opportunity to speak to you at this phase of the process. It is unprecedented, and we thank you for that. This individual is not intellectually disabled. There are still post-conviction relief proceedings pending as we speak in federal court. This, ladies and gentlemen, I respectfully submit to you, is not the forum to litigate this claim of innocence. The United States Supreme Court denied cert in this case. It is now post-conviction relief proceedings. Let that be litigated. There is not a death warrant in this case. Henry, however you pronounce his first name, Broadway, is not condemned. They are proclaiming innocence. They obviously are seeking release into our population, not general population at Angola. That man wants to be walking the streets with you, me, Myron Daniels, Dave Mays, Clarence McGarner, retired Chief Ferries, Hiller Moore, Kim and Lee. And God forbid the rest of the Smothers family, or Summer, the rest of them. Let this work itself out in federal court. This conviction has been upheld. There have been evidentiary hearings in district court. I believe there were 5 separate hearings, days in front of the Honorable Ralph Tyson, then moved on to the federal court. To grant a clemency hearing for this man would just be one step further. And we all know he will not be satisfied in general population. He wants out. On behalf of the family, on behalf of law enforcement, we ask that you please deny his request for clemency. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Moore, did you want to speak?
It's all very good for you. Morning, guys. For 1 day for the year, and Marty Jackson, one of the best judges that have been around, and all you other gentlemen. So we respect the position. You're in a tough position. And Judge Marabella, I understand your folks and why you do what you do, and I get it. You work right, man. And this case is a little unique, a little different. I only wanted to speak about the manner in which these folks were notified about what was going to happen. And that it is really offensive. They received a letter in the mail from a law office representing the defendant. In that letter, it said that we have hired a special victims counsel for you. They don't work for us, they work for you. Read my letter, and please call my office and we'll get you in touch with your victim's representative. When they got that letter, Warwick Dunn called me and said, what in the hell is going on? We obviously had no idea. And on that day, all of these petitions were filed in mass at one time. Obviously, something had been in plans for a very long time, and no notice was given to us other than that letter. And I can tell you that over the years, the number of times that I've had to call Mr. Dunn, sometimes he answers, sometimes he takes time because he wants to know what is happening now. I could see it in his face, I could hear it in his voice. This is killing him, his family, and all the other families that we've seen it before. And I know that put you guys in such a difficult position. You have a tough job to do. We would respectfully request that you deny this consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Okay, there's no other comments to be made, so I think we're here to vote. We'll start with Mrs. Jackson.
First, I'd like to thank everyone who participated today. Your input is important. For me, one thing that's really important for me is consistency in how I did things as a judge. I tried to be even-handed in every case that I had because it's important. I think that goes a long way to ensuring justice as well as confidence in the system. With that being said, this board sets certain guidelines for consideration of clemency application. Mr. Broadway, in his application, meets those requirements, just as any other applicant would. And granting a hearing is not insurance in any way of relief. It's just we put a process in place, and I believe when you put a process in place, you should follow that process. Another thing that concerns me in this case is that there were 3 people involved in this terrible crime. All 3 of them equally as culpable, every single one of them. And yet, Kevin Bromfield, who is clearly acknowledged as being the person who actually killed Officer's mothers, will not ever be executed. There's a claim of intellectual disability, but as I read the police reports, time and time, his name came up as the main actor, the mastermind, and yet he is not facing execution. Wes Paul, equally as culpable, pled to attempted armed robbery, received a 25-year sentence. The only person facing execution is Henry Broadway. And I will tell you that troubles me. That troubles me. And so because he meets the requirements for a hearing, and because of my concern about the inconsistency of the outcomes in these cases, my vote would be to grant a hearing.
Thank you, Mrs. Jackson. Mr. Roche.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. A lot of the information troubles me also. But under the Louisiana Code, Title 22, Section 5, states there are 8 reasons why I could deny an application. And I'm just going to mention a couple of those. The serious nature, the egregious nature of the crime, and is no more heinous crime than the murder of a police officer. Even if that person is not directly responsible for it, he participated in a felony that resulted in the death of a police officer and a seriously wounding of an assistant manager of a supermarket store in the progress of doing their job. The second reason that I'm going to use is his supervision history. Mr. Broadway has been on supervision on 2 different occasions. Both of those occasions, he was terminated unsatisfactorily simply because he had other felonies or misdemeanor convictions. And knowing what I know after listening to Ms. Lee, the express opposition in the victim's family, Mr. Dunn and his sister Summer, the adamant opposition from the Louisiana State Troopers Association and the Attorney General of the state of Louisiana, Baton Rouge law enforcement, and the DA's office in East Baton Rouge who is adamantly opposed to hearing this based upon the trauma that it could and would inflict on the victim's family. I have no other choice than to deny and reject this application based on information that I have. Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. O'Shea. Mr. Marabella.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I would like to thank everybody for being here. Certainly, the victims in this case, the victim's family. As Mr. Moore pointed out, I've got a lot of friends involved in this case. This is an extremely difficult case. This is an administrative hearing to determine if this inmate meets eligibility requirements for a full hearing. At this hearing, we have allowed public comments of those in favor and those who are opposed to a recommendation for a full hearing. As a member of this pardon board, I think it's important to note that every sector of the criminal justice system has its own obligations and responsibilities. Law enforcement has their responsibilities and their obligations. And I can tell you, my 50 years in the criminal justice system, I have the utmost respect for law enforcement. Prosecutors have their obligations and responsibilities. I respect them. I was a prosecutor, and I believe and I hope that I honorably carried out those responsibilities. I respect the defense lawyers for the job that they do. I was a defense lawyer. I hope that I honorably carried that out. Judges have their responsibility in this system. I was a judge, and I hope that I honorably carried that out. Legislators also have their obligation and responsibility. And the pardon board has its obligations and responsibilities as well. And they're all different. And I hope when this is all said and done and I'm off this board that I can honestly say I honorably carried out what I believe to be my obligation. On the pardon board, our responsibilities, duties, and obligations are to consider all of the circumstances and factors involved. We do not retry cases. We do not find fault with the prosecution, jurors, or the courts. We do look at the facts of the crime. We certainly look at the effects upon the victims and their families. And clearly the pain, the grief, the suffering that they have endured is unimaginable. While considering all of these factors, our primary duty and responsibility is to look at the inmate today. Who was he when he committed this horrible crime nearly 31 years ago? How, if in any way, has he changed in the last 30 years of incarceration? Who is he today? I think it's important to point out that we are not being asked to release this inmate. We are being asked to consider granting this inmate an opportunity to have a hearing to determine if he merits a recommendation from this board to the governor to change his sentence from death to life without parole. This is what this hearing is about. After reviewing the entire record, including public comments, comments of those in favor and the comments of those opposed, after nearly 31 years served, he is classified as a low risk. He's got a good disciplinary record, 9 write-ups in 31 years. He has a good overall institutional record. My vote is that this inmate does meet the eligibility. And my vote would be to grant the hearing.
Mr. Marabella. Mr. Freeman.
Okay, a lot has been said this morning. First off, I want to thank everyone for showing up today. It is hard. I'm sorry that the Dunn family has to keep reliving this every time something changes in our laws or every time they try to change the way things are looked at. But there is a process that we look at. This is a capital murder. A capital murder of a police officer, which there's no way they can say didn't know she was a police officer. She was in her unit. Miss Lee, they meant to kill you. There is no doubt in my mind. They meant to kill you also. And so I look at that process. A capital murder deserves more looking at than less. And you should have to do more to be eligible for relief in a capital murder case. And so that's my process. And my vote is to deny.
Thank you, Mr. Freeman. I have reviewed, this process was a little different than what we usually do for administrative review. We had a lot more information to look at than we usually do. After considering all that, I note that Mr. Broadway's case was affirmed, as has been mentioned, by the Supreme Court. His sentencing conviction was affirmed over 24 years ago in 1999. He has no death warrant. He does have post-conviction pending in federal court. And after listening to Ms. Lee and Mr. Dunn and the Smothers family, I cannot vote to move this application forward to a hearing and put these people through that again. So my vote today is to deny the application for a clemency hearing. Mr. Broadway's received 2 favorable votes to move forward. He's received 3 votes to deny his application to move forward. So today his application for a clemency hearing is denied.
Madam Chairman, I'd like to make a motion to adjourn at 9:37 a.m.
Second.
We have a motion and a second for adjournment. Without objection, we are adjourned. Thank you all.
Okay, so let's unpack this. This one is, it went on. I almost forgot about the part that stuck out to me the most when G Park, the top right corner there, with the Innocence Project, which I am such a fan of. But like my favorite Assistant DA, Tracy Balbero, said, don't skew the facts. Like, you don't need to get up here and completely skew the facts and include in your data people who were on death row and taken off of it as exonerated. It's not exonerated. Like she said, you have a right to an opinion, but don't skew the facts. It's ridiculous. It's, this case, with that being said, this case is particularly interesting in the sense that we have seen now, maybe you've seen it, but a handful of these hearings. And this one so far for me is the one that has the biggest question mark. The others that I've seen are just unimaginable terror with inflicted on human beings by these monsters that are on death row, and undeniable doubt. And you have people coming up and saying they should be taken off of death row, and you just shake your head and say, are you nuts? In this case, I do agree, more room for questioning in the idea that, first of all, his other 2 co-defendants are not on death row. He isn't the one that pulled the trigger. And it seems only one eyewitness that puts him on the scene, but we'll go through, there's quite a lot to unpack here. We'll go through it. Again, to quickly, on the flip side, though, you can say, well, look, he has no death sentence date. He's probably going to sit there forever. And this isn't the venue, I think, which was clearly stated. This is not the venue where you argue that. This is going through the courts. This is not the place if you to argue any of those facts, which they decided to argue. Let's watch something where it's a video of the co-defendant that was, he somehow duped the courts into saying that he was insane. And I say duped because it doesn't really seem that way. Here, I'm going to pull it up. And also we'll go over who the NFL player is. Hold on.
Officer Betty Smothers was murdered in an ambush robbery 23 years ago. Her family in court yet again facing the killer.
Kevin Brumfield was sentenced to death because he was declared intellectually disabled today. He was resentenced to life in prison. Sports Director Michael Cobble here now with you spent the day in court with Ward Dunn and his family.
I did, and everyone knew what was coming. They knew what the outcome was going to be, a resentencing to life in prison instead of execution. But that knowledge didn't make it any easier to face this ordeal 23 years later.
She like singing, so I started shooting.
It's the dumbest thing I've ever seen in my life.
Kevin Brumfield is a despicable coward.
This case was a classic first-degree murder case. All the evidence was there, him saying what he did and how he did it.
It was a textbook murder case with a unanimous jury conviction.
I don't know why it's like,
and a death sentence. So how does it dissolve into?
Oh, come on, internet. It doesn't even make sense.
Life in prison, according to the prosecutors who worked the case.
This is just annoying. All right. Well, you work on getting an upload done, and then you have it's just little things that you don't take into account.
Disabled.
We do have intellectually disabled people in our country, and this man was definitely not one of them. Warwick expressed that very eloquently because he personally spoke with him.
My football career, he knew my stats. I mean, it's those things. It's like a person who's mentally challenged. They're not going to know that. They're not going to want to keep up. If you weren't involved, why would you keep up with the everyday life of every sibling?
Ward Dunn is the oldest son of the murdered Baton Rouge police officer Betty Smothers. He said today that this is closure for his family if it's not the justice they sought 23 years ago.
It's time to close the book. The ending now, I think it's written. Close the book and move on.
For East Baton Rouge Parish District Attorney Hiller Moore, he's afraid this precedent could write future chapters for murder cases still yet to be tried.
Watch out for all the other cases that are now coming that they're going to claim that they're disabled. So what does this hold for us? Can you select a death penalty now on cases that are appropriate? What's going to happen 15, 20 years down the road? It's frustrating for prosecutors, police, community. Takes 23 years to make this decision.
Now, Warwick was outspoken this week in the wake of the recent police killings here in Baton Rouge, saying the city wrapped its arms around his family 23 years ago. He is confident it will do the same once again now for these recent families.
Okay, Michael, thank you.
Right now, the healing.
Yep. And who knew, right? It's just the beginning. And so this was his co-defendant who those seeking justice were trying to use as an example. So he was one of them that is off of death row because he somehow got the insanity defense going. And it's there's a lot of tragedy in this case. There really is. Here's another one. Richard did all this research, of course, as usual, but this is the granddaughter of the victim. She was out driving to Texas, and she was shot up, just, wrong place, wrong time, completely innocent. And this happened about a year ago. It does say that she is recovering, so when you're hit by it was an AK-47. It's hard to understand what recovering means, but just the idea that this family was attacked again. It was almost to the day 30 years from when Corporal Betty Smothers was killed, and here's her obituary from the police department. She was shot and killed in an ambush attack while moonlighting as a security guard, but she was in her patrol unit, as they said. This was not, they knew she was a cop. Corporal Smothers was in uniform and driving a marked patrol car when she and the store manager went to a bank to make a night deposit. As they sat in the patrol car, 3 suspects approached and opened fire. They fatally wounded Corporal Smothers and injured the manager. All 3 suspects were arrested after the incident and sentenced. We can do the court hearing. And for those of you who are curious about work done, her son who showed up there, and I know I was. So there's a whole, he's a legitimate football star. He played running back, and he played, what was it, from 1997 to 2008. And for those of you who are football fans, as a running back, it looks like he only missed 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It looks like he only missed 11 games from 1997 to 2008, which is really impressive. And it was for the Tampa Bay and Atlanta. And yeah, he has a strong career. And he wrote, this was something that affected him, of course, as it would for anyone who lost their mother. So there's quite a lot of articles on it. He wrote a book about it. He actually went to Angola and met with the killers face to face, and he writes about that experience. And I can drop the link in there if you want to check it out. And he has a non-for-profit that helps give housing to single women. This is affected him, as you can see, quite a bit. Of course, he was just, I think, what was he? He was 18 years old when it happened, I think. So, facts. During the evening on January 7th, 1993, Camille Lee left the supermarket where she was store manager and rode in a police vehicle with Corporal and we saw Camille Lee. She showed up today to speak, and she was an eyewitness. And rode in the police vehicle with Corporal Betty Smothers, an off-duty police officer in special detail at the supermarket. The deposits in the store's sales receipts into the bank deposit box. Officer Smothers drove the vehicle into the bank parking lot box next to the box. While Lee was in the process of opening the box to make the deposit, a series of gunshots erupted. Lee turned and saw that Officer Smothers had been shot and realized that she had also been shot. She reached across Officer Smothers, pulls herself towards the steering wheel, and pressed on the gas pedal. That's incredible that she did that. At that point, one of the assailants looked in the driver's side window, and Lee made eye contact with him, and that was him. She then sped out of the parking lot and drove the car to a nearby convenience store where she called police. Officer Smothers died almost immediately, but Lee survived the attack. The next day, Lee underwent hypnosis, and this is what they were talking about. You want hypnosis? How would you, in the hospital to aid police in preparing a composite drawing of the assailant that she had observed at close range. On January 9th, 1993, Detective DeNicola received a tip from a confidential informant that Kevin Brumfield had murdered the police officer that Eddie Paul had informed about the crime. Brought to the police station as a material witness, Eddie Paul told the police that his cousin, Wes Paul, along with Kevin Brumfield, as someone he knew only as AJ or Ray J, had committed the crime. So let's see here. The police obtained a warrant for Brumfield and West Paul and were both arrested January 11, 1993. After searching police records for someone with the street name AJ or Ray, the police identified Darren Brooks as the possible suspect. Eddie Paul viewed a photograph of Brooks and positively identified him as the man he knew as Ray, and who accompanied Brumfield and West Paul. The police obtained a warrant for Brooks and arrested him, but quickly released him upon learning that he had been in police custody at the time of the shooting. Well, that's not a good start, right? They get a positive identification. And then they say, "Oh, wait a minute, it couldn't have been him." There is arguments that are being made here as to why you might say there is doubt. And again, this is not the right forum for bringing it up. So it really was quite probably a ridiculous attempt by the Innocence Project. I really like who was it that said it? Was it? I can't recall. Was it Mr. O'Shea who brought it up, but that he had filed complaints because he didn't get his sex novel timely? That was great. No, sorry, that was Tracy Baldera who said that, of course. West Paul, upon questioning the police, implicated the defendant in the crime. When the police arrested the defendant at his home, he spontaneously stated, "I knew you were coming, and I didn't shoot the police officer." On the way to the police station, the defendant also spontaneously stated that he had nothing to do with the killing of the police officer and nothing to do with Brumfield, although the police did not mention either the murder or Brumfield. The police also searched the defendant's home based on his mother's giving consent to search, and they seized a camouflage jacket similar to the one worn by the assailant seen by Lee. According to the police, defendant initially denied any involvement in the crime, but admitted after being shown pictures of Officer Smothers that he had been involved. He stated that Brumfield and Smokey picked him up to rob two women and were going to make a bank deposit. But claimed he did not know one of the women was a police officer. Oh, interesting, right? So he's like, he heard in the news that a police... No, that doesn't make sense. They were in a police car. Anyways, he further stated that he waited in the business until the woman arrived, and he ran towards the car and fired 6 or 7 rounds with a pistol. Upon being requested to give a taped statement, the defendant refused and claimed that he hadn't said anything, adding that he would deny anything they had written in their notes. Nevertheless, according to police, the detective read the notes of the defendant, who initialed the statement. At trial, Lee positively identified the defendant as one of the assailants, and West Paul, while admitting he was driver of the getaway car, confirmed the defendant participated in the robbery and murder. The defense called a series of family members and friends who testified the defendant was at the home in the company at the time. The defendant also took the stand and denied any involvement in the crime. He specifically denied that he made any inculpatory statements to the police and claimed that he was beaten by the police during his interrogation. He gave detailed account of the attack, which included blows struck by the fists of the officers and partial asphyxiation underneath a plastic bag pulled over his head. And frankly, I believe it. This is 1993, Louisiana. They just killed a police officer. I don't doubt it. When defendants put on in front of the jury the camouflage jacket seized from his bedroom, the oversized jacket came down over his wrists in the manner described by Lee after her hypnotic session. It's pretty incredible, though, to, in that moment, have the memory of what exactly someone looks like, what they're wearing. I mean, I know sometimes those things can go by slowly, but also they can go by so fast that you don't. I mean, they have a lot of studies that people can't. There was one study I heard where it was like maybe you've heard about this, but it's like a professor teaching a class full of students and kind of like an auditorium. There's maybe 150 students there. And then someone runs down all the flights of stairs up to the podium where the professor is, grabs the professor's purse, and runs out. And then the professor says, "Oh, it was a stunt. Now everyone draw a description of what the perpetrator looked like." And out of the 150 drawings, they can have like so many different variations. And it was an interesting study. Of course, that's just one example, but the jury unanimously found the defendant guilty of first-degree murder. After the trial, the penalty phase, the jury unanimously recommended the death penalty, finding as aggravating circumstances that the defendant had been engaged in perpetration of an attempted armed robbery, that the victim was a peace officer engaged in her lawful duties, and that the defendant knowingly created a risk of death or great bodily harm. More than one person defendant then filed the appeal. And they bring up hearsay evidence. So there are three did they even, is this report mentioning Henry? It doesn't even mention this is just about his co-defendant. So we actually don't, there's quite a lot of information that we have here, but we don't have information that can shed light into, for example, I don't see any information from the court hearing where it talks about Henry Broadway, what his involvement was. It's actually because there were 3 perpetrators in this attack, it's a bit overwhelming to gather all of it. But I think in a nutshell, I can ask you now. I just want to share from the perspective that I just before watching these 2 hearings saw 2 hearings that were so vile and so, I mean, vile is not even the word. I'm talking about some of the worst crimes that you can hear about being committed to children, involving sexual assault, involving the taking of lives in front of their mothers. They're all of those things, and these are the type of death row inmates that they're trying to bring to the governor to commute the sentence from death. And it's like it's you just scream at the screen and say, how dare you. This is obviously one where you can clearly still, like Tracy Tracy said, the assistant DA, like, this is the wrong venue, and he's been found guilty and it's going through the courts, and don't skew the data and all of that. But this is a case. But I didn't see for example, the Innocence Project show up to any of the other hearings. This is a case where it seems that there is, I think, a question about whether you can. There is a better argument in those cases, but still, all of that being said and done, I'm not for it being brought up to the governor. He doesn't have a death row date. It's not even my understanding that it's like, why put the victims through this all over again and keep bringing it back and bringing it back to the victims? And he doesn't seem to be that an inmate that's trying to do anything to improve his life. Hasn't done any programs. He's like, just kind of, there's nothing outstanding or impressive about him. But you tell me how you feel, and if also you like this style of hearing where he doesn't, get up and speak or not. There are a few more that we can do, and they're going to keep rolling them out. I think we'll get all 56. So let me know how you feel about it. But with that, I'll let you go.